I'm sitting here now, staring at the screen, and I still can't quite believe the words that came out of her mouth. It's been 6 months since my dad passed, and just last Tuesday, during the first reading of his will, my own mother placed her hand flat on the mahogany table, right over the signed document, looked me straight in the eye, the same eyes she used to look at me with when I was a little kid running to her for comfort, and she said, with the coldest, most definitive tone I have ever heard, "You won't get a single cent." She didn't whisper it, she announced it, and the sound of it in that sterile lawyer's office was like a gunshot. The shock in the room was palpable. My 2 older siblings froze, the solicitor actually dropped his pen, and I just sat there, feeling every memory I had of my father, every shared laugh, every late night conversation, evaporate into nothingness. Was I the monster she clearly thought I was? Was there something I did, years ago, that truly justified being completely disinherited from my own father's estate, just because my mother said so? Honestly, I need you to listen to this whole story, and then you tell me if I was wrong for what I did next. Tell me if you would have just accepted it. This whole mess, this unbelievable betrayal, starts decades ago, back when my father, Robert, and my mother, Elinor, were young and first building their life together. They were the classic success story. Dad was an engineer who started his own firm. Mom was an accountant who managed the books, and together they built a significant family fortune. They had 3 kids, Mark, who is 10 years my senior and always took the responsible, straight-laced path, Sarah, 5 years older, the artist of the family who moved to the city, and then there was me, James, the youngest, the unexpected one. I suppose my role in the family, in Mom's eyes at least, was always slightly less defined, a little more wild card. Mark and Sarah were always excellent students, married early, and settled into conventional careers that Mom and Dad approved of. They were the dependable ones. I, on the other hand, was the one who went traveling for a year after college, the one who tried to start a small, slightly risky software company, the one who, in a nutshell, didn't give Mom the perfect, predictable grandkid, producing life she'd mapped out for me. She always saw my entrepreneurial spirit as recklessness and my desire for independence as a deliberate rejection of the comfort their money could provide. It wasn't like I was a bad kid or even a bad adult. I worked hard. My relationship with my father, Robert, was actually wonderful. Dad was the quiet, grounding force in the family. He understood my drive because he had the same drive when he started his own company from nothing. He was my biggest supporter, always lending an ear when my business hit a rough patch, or just sending a cryptic text that read, "Keep building, son." He never gave me money, not for the business anyway, because he always said I needed to earn that success myself, and I respected him for that. But he did give me his time, his advice, and his unwavering belief. Mom, though, she was a different story. She controlled the finances, and she used money as a weapon. If Mark needed a down payment for a new house, she'd arrange it, but she'd also require a detailed breakdown of his monthly expenses to ensure fiscal responsibility. If Sarah needed funds to upgrade her art studio, Mom would provide them, but only after a lengthy lecture on the instability of an art career. With me, it was always a flat no. She'd tell me, "You made your bed, James, now you lie in it." Which, again, was fair enough. I didn't want a handout, but it created this underlying tension where I always felt like the one on the outside, the one who wasn't quite good enough. The real turning point, the event that I believe started Mom's long-term plan to exclude me, happened about 5 years ago. My startup, after 3 grueling years, finally hit a major wall. We had a product, we had a few clients, but we needed a significant cash injection to scale up, and the VC funding fell through at the last minute. I was devastated. I went to my dad, not for a loan, but just for a sounding board. I remember sitting in his den, the smell of old paper and leather in the air, telling him I might have to close the doors. He listened patiently, then he leaned forward and said something that stunned me. He told me that he had set aside a substantial amount of money for each of us, his children, when they turned 40, specifically to secure their futures or help them realize a long-term goal. He explained that since he and Mom had done so well, he wanted his kids to have a foundation to stand on, but only when they were mature enough to handle it. Mark and Sarah had already received theirs quietly, and it was structured in a way that protected them from capital gains and taxes. He told me mine was set to vest the following year, when I turned 40, and that he could access it a little early to save my company, if I wanted. It wasn't an inheritance, it was a distribution from a trust they had created decades ago. This was huge asterisk. It wasn't a handout from Mom, it was a calculated, planned investment in his children from Dad. When I tentatively brought this up to Mom, hoping to discuss the details, her face went blank. She denied everything. She said, "Your father is mistaken. There is no such trust, James. He must be confused. We only allocate funds based on demonstrated need and responsibility." I knew Dad wasn't confused. He was sharp as a tack. I gently pressed her, mentioning the specific structure Dad had described, and that's when she switched from denial to anger. She accused me of trying to manipulate my father while he was under stress from his own business dealings. She accused me of being greedy, of only caring about the money, and she ended the conversation by slamming her hand on the table and saying, "The money stays where it is, James. You will not ruin your father's retirement savings with your failing venture." I walked away from that exchange knowing two things. First, that the money existed exactly as Dad had described, and second, that Mom had somehow managed to consolidate control over it and was actively preventing me from accessing what was rightfully mine, even though she had already let my siblings have theirs. Dad later apologized profusely, saying he didn't know how she'd gained such control, but he was getting older, and the fight just wasn't in him anymore. He promised me, however, that he would make absolutely sure I was taken care of in his official will. "Don't worry, Jim," he told me, "I will ensure fairness, I promise. Well, my dad passed away suddenly from a heart attack 6 months ago. The grief was paralyzing. Dad was my hero, my confidant. The funeral was a blur, and in the months that followed, Mom was fragile, leaning heavily on Mark and Sarah. I offered my support too, but she remained distant, almost cold. She didn't want me around. I just assumed she was dealing with her grief in her own way. I focused on my own life, keeping my head above water with my company, which, against all odds, I managed to pivot and save, though it required me taking on significant personal debt. Then came the meeting for the will reading. The solicitor, Mr. Davies, was a family friend, a kindly old man who had handled Dad's business for decades. He looked uncomfortable from the moment we all sat down. The will was fairly standard for the first few pages. Personal effects, jewelry, the house, all to Mom. Then came the distribution of the business assets and the remaining liquid fortune, which was substantial, in the multi-millions, split into 3 equal parts for my beloved children. But as Mr. Davies began to read my name, my mother interrupted him. She didn't raise her voice, but her tone cut through the silence. She reached out and placed her hand over the document. That's when she delivered the line that shattered everything. "You won't get a single cent." She didn't elaborate. She simply held the gaze. Mr. Davies stammered, saying he couldn't alter a signed document. Mark and Sarah looked horrified. Mark spoke up, "Mom, what are you doing? Dad wanted the split to be equal." She just shook her head slowly, never taking her eyes off me. "Your father's wishes were complicated, Mark, and I am the sole executor. I have the authority to interpret the dispersal of the liquid assets based on what I know he would have wanted in. And, given all the circumstances, and James's financial irresponsibility over the years, makes him an unworthy beneficiary. The assets will be split between you and Sarah only. Mr. Davies, bless his cotton socks, objected vehemently, stating that her powers as executor did not extend to overriding the clear and explicit beneficiaries named in the will, only to managing assets, but she had an answer for everything. She produced a single, notarized codicil, a handwritten note from Dad, signed and witnessed, that she claimed gave her the full discretion to distribute the estate as she saw fit, citing my instability as the reason. Dad's handwriting looked shaky, almost forced. I knew then that she had coerced him in his final, frail months, twisting his last thoughts to suit her agenda, and the fury inside me was a silent, cold explosion. So that's the situation I was in. My own mother, who had already withheld a major financial trust that was rightfully mine, was now actively and illegally trying to steal my entire inheritance from my deceased father, basing her actions on a coerced document and a blatant lie about my character. She wasn't just being mean. She was committing fraud and theft, all in the name of teaching me a lesson for daring to be different. I was trapped. I could have walked away and swallowed the debt I had to save my company, but then she wins, proving that her manipulative tactics work. Or I could fight, which meant tearing the family apart, dragging my father's memory through a messy legal battle, and permanently alienating myself from my mother and possibly my siblings. What do you do when the person who is supposed to love you unconditionally uses the law to inflict the most painful betrayal imaginable? Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have started the lawsuit, or would you have just walked away and let her have her victory? I didn't walk away. I stood up slowly in that lawyer's office, the silence ringing in my ears. I didn't yell. I looked at Mom, who still had that smug, victorious glint in her eyes, and I said, "You shouldn't have done that, Mom." And then I turned to Mr. Davies. "Mr. Davies, I instruct you to immediately freeze all assets pertaining to my father's estate. I will be filing a motion to contest the validity of that codicil and to have my mother removed as executor on the grounds of undue influence, coercion, and breach of fiduciary duty." Mark and Sarah were stunned, but Mom didn't flinch. She just smiled. "You won't win, James. You can't afford the legal fees." That's when I played my card, the one she never saw coming, the card that had been sitting in my back pocket for 5 years, waiting for the right moment. "Oh, I think I can, Mom. You see, when Dad told me about the trust 5 years ago, the one you said didn't exist, I took a precaution. I consulted a trust attorney. That attorney told me that trust, the one with the significant capital that was set aside for the 3 of us when we turned 40, was structured as an irrevocable living trust. He told me that Mark and Sarah had already received their distribution, and that my distribution was being improperly held by the sole living trustee. He also informed me that by intentionally diverting and withholding my share of that trust for years after distributing the shares to Mark and Sarah, you created a textbook case of breach of trust and financial malfeasance. I saw the color drain from her face. She had forgotten about the other asterisk money, the trust money, the money that wasn't part of the will, but that was locked down in legal documents. I continued, my voice steady. That trust fund, the one I am legally entitled to, is more than enough to fund a protracted legal battle that will drag your name through the mud and cost you far more than the total value of Dad's estate, and unlike this will dispute, which is messy, the trust case is open and shut. You've withheld my share. All the documentation is there, including the bank transfers to Mark and Sarah 5 years ago that prove it was a selective withholding. I pulled a file out of my briefcase, a thick one. I filed the initial papers for the trust recovery last night, Mom. If you do not immediately rescind the codicil, agree to the equal distribution of this will, and step down as executor in favor of Mr. Davies, I will not only sue you to recover my share of that trust, but I will also petition the court to have a criminal investigation launched for fraud. You will lose everything, Mom, not just the money, but your reputation, and possibly your freedom. The shift in the room was instantaneous. Her face, moments before etched with triumph, was now a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. Mark and Sarah stared at me, then at Mom, realizing the scope of her deception and the depth of her control over their father. The rest was surprisingly swift. The next day, after several frantic, tearful calls from Mom that I refused to answer, her solicitor called mine. She agreed to everything. The codicil was withdrawn, citing clerical error and grief, induced confusion, and Mr. Davies was formally appointed as the sole, independent executor. The estate was split exactly as Dad had intended, 3 equal parts, and I received my full share. And then came the final twist of the knife, the consequence of my having filed those trust papers. She was forced to release my full share of the long, held, irrevocable living trust. I got my inheritance from the will, and I got the significant trust distribution that had been wrongfully denied to me for years. It was a massive win, financially, but it came at an immense cost. The aftermath was exactly what I expected. The family exploded. Mark and Sarah were caught in the middle. They initially tried to mediate, telling me I went too far, but when they saw the evidence of the trust money, the money Mom had also lied to asterisk them asterisk about, they grew cold towards her too. They realized the extent of her manipulation, and how she had essentially dictated the family narrative for years. My relationship with Mom is, predictably, permanently severed. She sees me as the ungrateful child who ruined her retirement and her life. I see her as the person who fundamentally betrayed her son's trust and her husband's dying wishes over a need for control. I used the money, both the inheritance and the trust fund, to pay off my company's debt, scale up, and I am now, finally, debt-free and thriving, a success story built on my own grit, but secured by my father's foresight. I don't talk to my mother. Mark and Sarah are in occasional contact, but the holidays are quiet, strained, and separate. My father's death taught me that you can't allow manipulative people, even family, to rewrite your reality and steal your future. You have to fight not just for the money, but for the principle of fairness and the truth of your own life. I still have that moment burned into my mind, her hand on the will, the cold look in her eye, the absolute certainty of her words. You won't get a single cent. She was so wrong. She underestimated my resolve, and she forgot about the truth. The story ends with me financially secure, but emotionally scarred, yet strangely at peace. I didn't get a single cent from her goodwill, but I got everything my father intended for me through the power of the law. If I have to give a moral to this incredibly messy, painful story, it's this: always protect yourself with legal documentation, because when love fails, only the paper trail remains. Like this video if you were on my side in this horrible situation. Subscribe for more true stories about family betrayals and drama, and please, share your final thoughts on this whole mess in comments section. Did I handle this the right way, or should I have been the bigger person and just let her win? I'll see you all in the next story.